The wire bit into Tessa Sullivan's gloves as she tried to stretch it taut between two posts on land that nobody had wanted for 3 years, until she claimed it. The Texas sun beat down on the abandoned 40 acres outside Bandera in the summer of 1882, turning the scrub grass golden and the air thick as honey. She had been out here since dawn, her back aching and her hands cramping, determined to prove that a 22-year-old woman could work a piece of land just as well as any man. The fence posts stood at uneven heights, some rotted at the base, others leaning like drunks outside a saloon, and she had been replacing them one by one for the past week. The problem was the corner post. It rose a good 7 feet high, and even standing on her toes, Tessa could not reach the top to loop the wire through the eye hook she had driven in yesterday. She had dragged a rock over to stand on, but it wobbled beneath her boots, and she had already slipped twice, scraping her shin the second time. Blood had dried on her stocking beneath her split skirt, and she was considering riding back to town for a ladder when she heard hoofbeats approaching from the east. Tessa turned, shading her eyes against the glare. A rider emerged from the heat shimmer, sitting tall in the saddle on a bay horse that looked well cared for despite the dust of the trail. As he drew closer, she could make out a weathered hat, a vest over a work shirt, and the easy posture of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. He was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled at his collar and a face that had been tanned by countless days under the sun. "Morning," he called out as he reined in his horse about 20 feet away, respectful of her space. "Saw you from the road. Looks like you could use a hand with that post." Tessa bristled immediately. She had heard that tone before, the assumption that she needed help, that she could not manage on her own. "I am managing just fine, thank you," she said, turning back to the post and reaching up again, though her fingertips barely brushed the eye hook. The rider dismounted anyway, tying his horse to one of the completed fence posts. "Name is Donovan," he said, walking toward her with his hands visible and non-threatening. "I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles north of here. Been riding fence line all morning, and I know stubborn work when I see it." "I did not ask for help," Tessa said, but there was less heat in her voice now. She was tired, and her pride was warring with the practical reality that she had been struggling with this post for over an hour. "No, you did not," Isaac agreed. He stopped a few feet away, looking up at the post and then at her. "But I am offering it anyway. No charge, no strings, just one neighbor helping another." Tessa studied him for a moment. His eyes were a clear gray, honest and direct, and there was no mockery in his expression. He looked genuinely willing to help, not condescending or superior. She had met plenty of men who wanted to help only so they could prove she could not do the work, but something about Isaac Donovan seemed different. "All right," she said finally, stepping back from the rock. "But just the top hook. I can manage the rest." Isaac nodded, stepping up onto the rock with far more stability than she had managed. He was taller, and his reach brought his hands easily to the top of the post. "Hand me the wire," he said. Tessa passed him the end of the wire she had been wrestling with. He looped it through the eye hook with practiced ease, pulling it tight and then securing it with a twist that would hold against wind and weather. When he stepped down, he tipped his hat to her. "There you go," he said. "Should hold now." "Thank you," Tessa said, and she meant it. She picked up her hammer and began driving in staples along the lower part of the post, securing the wire at intervals. Isaac did not leave immediately. Instead, he walked along the fence line she had already completed, examining her work with an appraising eye. "You have done good work here," he said. "Posts are solid, wire is tight. Most folks would have given up on land like this." "Most folks did," Tessa replied, driving in another staple with more force than necessary. This property has been sitting empty since the previous owner died 3 years ago. His family did not want it, said it was too far from town and too much trouble, but it was all I could afford. Isaac turned back to her, and there was something like respect in his gaze. Takes courage to take on a place like this alone. You have family helping you. No, Tessa said simply. She did not elaborate, and Isaac did not press. There was a story there he could tell, but it was not his to ask about on a first meeting. Well, he said after a moment, if you need help with any more posts, the Double R is just up the road. I am out riding fence most days, and I know my way around wire and wood. I will keep that in mind, Tessa said, pausing in her work to look at him properly. He had a kind face, she realized, weathered but open. There was strength in his shoulders and hands, the kind that came from years of hard work, but there was also a gentleness in the way he moved, careful not to crowd her or make her uncomfortable. Isaac untied his horse and swung back into the saddle. "Take care, Miss Sullivan," he said, and Tessa realized she had never told him her name. He must have heard it in town. Bandera was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, especially when a single woman bought land on her own. "You too, Mr. Donovan," she replied, and she watched him ride off toward the north, his horse kicking up small clouds of dust that hung in the still air. Tessa went back to her work, but her thoughts kept drifting to the cowboy who had stopped to help her. It had been a long time since anyone had offered assistance without expecting something in return, and even longer since a man had treated her with simple, straightforward respect. She hammered in the last few staples on the corner post, and then moved on to the next section of fence, her muscles protesting but her determination unshaken. By the time the sun began to sink toward the horizon, she had completed another 30 feet of fence. It was slow, exhausting work, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. She gathered her tools into the canvas bag she had brought from town and walked back to the small cabin that stood near the center of the property. It was barely more than a shack, with a single room, a stone fireplace, and a roof that leaked in 2 places when it rained. But she had patched the leaks with tar and replaced the broken window with glass salvaged from an abandoned storefront, and now it was starting to feel like home. Tessa lit a fire in the fireplace and set a pot of beans to heat. She had bread from town, only a day old, and she ate her simple meal while sitting on the porch steps, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The night sounds of the prairie surrounded her, crickets and distant coyotes, the rustle of wind through the dry grass. It was lonely, she could not deny that, but it was also peaceful in a way her life had never been before. She had grown up in St. Louis, the youngest of 4 daughters in a family that had more pride than money. Her father had been a clerk, her mother a seamstress, and they had scraped by on the edges of respectability. When Tessa was 19, her parents had arranged a marriage for her to a man twice her age, a shopkeeper who wanted a young wife to keep his house and bear his children. She had tried to make it work, truly she had, but he had been cold and controlling, and after 2 years of misery she had left him with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small inheritance her grandmother had left her. She had come to Texas because it was far from St. Louis, far from her family's disappointment and her husband's anger. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, a scandalous affair that had cost her every penny of her inheritance in legal fees. But she was free now, and that freedom was worth more than gold. She had used the last of her money to buy this land, and she was determined to make it work, no matter how hard the labor or how long the days. Tessa washed her dishes in a bucket of water from the well and then went inside to sleep. The cabin was dark except for the embers of the fire, and she lay on her narrow cot, staring up at the ceiling and thinking about Isaac Donovan. He had been kind, she told herself, nothing more. There was no reason to read anything into a simple offer of help. But as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself hoping that she might see him again. 3 days later, she did. Tessa was working on the western section of the fence, trying to dig a post hole in ground that was more rock than soil, when she heard hoofbeats again. She straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead, and saw Isaac riding toward her on the same bay horse. This time, he had a coil of extra wire slung over his saddle horn and a bag that looked like it might contain tools. "Morning," he called out as he approached. "Thought you might be able to use some extra supplies. Boss at the Double R had wire left over from our repairs last month, and he said I could bring it by if you needed it." Tessa leaned on her post hole digger, surprised and a little suspicious. "That is generous of your boss. What does he want in return?" Isaac dismounted and untied the wire, setting it on the ground near her. "Nothing," he said. "Mr. Reynolds is a good man. He believes in helping neighbors, and he has more wire than he needs right now." Tessa looked at the coil of wire, which was far better quality than what she had been able to afford in town. It would save her time and trouble, and she could use it on the sections of fence that bordered the road, where appearance mattered more. "All right," she said slowly. "Tell Mr. Reynolds I said thank you." "I will," Isaac said. He glanced at the post hole she was working on and then at the ground around it, which was littered with rocks she had pried out with a crowbar. "That looks like tough digging." "It is," Tessa admitted. "I have been at this hole for over an hour, and I am only down about a foot." Isaac picked up the crowbar and knelt beside the hole. "May I?" he asked, and when Tessa nodded, he began working at the rocks with practiced efficiency, prying them loose and tossing them aside. Within 10 minutes, he had cleared enough rock that Tessa could resume digging with the post hole digger. The hole deepened quickly after that, and soon she had it down to the required depth. "Thank you," Tessa said, and this time there was genuine warmth in her voice. "I would have been here until noon without your help." "Happy to do it," Isaac said. He straightened, dusting off his hands. "You have coffee in that cabin of yours." Tessa hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I do. Come on, I will put a pot on." They walked together across the field to the cabin, and Tessa felt oddly self-conscious about inviting him inside. The cabin was so small and plain, with only the bare necessities and none of the comforts she had grown up with. But if Isaac noticed the poverty of her surroundings, he did not show it. He took off his hat as he stepped through the door and sat on the rough wooden chair she indicated, looking around with interest rather than judgment. Tessa made coffee on the stove, strong and black the way she liked it, and poured 2 cups. She handed one to Isaac and then sat on the edge of her cot, the only other place to sit in the cabin. "How long have you been in Bandera?" Isaac asked, cradling the hot cup in his hands. "About 2 months," Tessa said. "I came from St. Louis, needed a fresh start." "St. Louis to Bandera is quite a change," Isaac observed. "What made you choose Texas?" Tessa considered her answer carefully. She had not told anyone in town the full story of her past, and she was not sure she wanted to share it with Isaac either. But there was something about his steady, patient manner that made her feel like she could trust him. "I was married," she said finally. "It did not work out. I got divorced, which cost me everything I had, and I decided I wanted to go somewhere nobody knew me. Somewhere I could build a life on my own terms." Isaac nodded slowly. "That takes courage," he said. "Most women in your situation would have gone back to their families." "My family did not approve of the divorce," Tessa said. "They thought I should have stayed and made it work, no matter how unhappy I was. We have not spoken since I left." "I am sorry," Isaac said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. Family should support you, not judge you. What about you? Tessa asked, wanting to turn the conversation away from her own painful history. Have you always worked on the double R? Mostly, Isaac said. I grew up on a ranch in Colorado, but my father died when I was 15 and my mother could not keep the place going on her own. We sold it and moved to Texas where she had family. I have been working ranches ever since, learning the trade and saving money. Saving for what? Tessa asked. My own place, Isaac said, and there was a light in his eyes that made him look younger. I want a ranch of my own someday, nothing big, just enough land for a good herd and room to grow. I have been putting away every spare dollar for the past 10 years and I am getting close. Tessa smiled. That is a good dream, she said. I hope you get it. What is your dream? Isaac asked. What do you want this land to become? Tessa looked out the window at the field beyond, where her fence posts stood like soldiers marking the boundaries of her territory. I want it to be mine, she said. I want to prove that I can make a life here on my own. Maybe run some cattle or grow crops if the land will support it. I have not figured out all the details yet, but I know I want to build something that belongs to me, that nobody can take away. Isaac raised his coffee cup in a small salute. That is a good dream too, he said. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, drinking their coffee and listening to the wind outside. Tessa found herself relaxing in a way she had not with anyone since coming to Bandera. Isaac did not ask prying questions or make her feel like she owed him explanations. He simply accepted her as she was, and that was a rare gift. When Isaac finished his coffee, he stood and put his hat back on. I should get back to work, he said, but I will be riding fence again in a few days. If you need help with anything, just flag me down. I will, Tessa said. She walked him to the door and watched as he mounted his horse. Thank you again for the wire, and for the help. Anytime, Isaac said, and he rode off toward the double R, leaving Tessa standing in the doorway with a strange warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. Over the next few weeks, Isaac stopped by regularly. Sometimes he brought supplies, other times he just offered a hand with whatever work Tessa was doing that day. He helped her set a new gate at the entrance to her property, showed her how to splice wire when it broke, and taught her the best way to brace corner posts so they would not lean over time. He never stayed long, usually just an hour or two, but those hours became the highlight of Tessa's days. She found herself looking forward to his visits, listening for the sound of hoofbeats and feeling a flutter of excitement when she saw him riding across her land. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Tessa learned that Isaac had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh, and that he had a deep respect for the land and the animals he worked with. Isaac learned that Tessa was fiercely independent but also kind-hearted, that she had a quick mind and a stubborn streak a mile wide, and that she sang to herself when she thought nobody was listening. One afternoon in late August, they were working on the last section of fence, the northern boundary that separated Tessa's land from open range. The day was hot and still, the air so thick it felt like breathing through wool. Tessa had been working since dawn, and by midday she was dizzy with heat and exhaustion. She did not realize how bad it was until she tried to lift a post into place and felt the world tilt sideways. Isaac caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and steady around her. Easy, he said, his voice sharp with concern. Sit down before you fall down. Tessa did not have the strength to argue. She let Isaac guide her to the shade of a scraggly mesquite tree and ease her down onto the ground. He fetched his canteen from his saddle and made her drink, holding the water to her lips until she had taken several long swallows. "You have been pushing yourself too hard," Isaac said, sitting beside her and keeping one hand on her shoulder as if afraid she might topple over. "How long have you been out here today?" "Since sunrise," Tessa admitted. The world was still spinning a little, but the water was helping. "I wanted to finish the fence before September." "Not if it kills you," Isaac said firmly. "You need to take breaks, drink more water, and eat more than just beans and bread." "I am eating fine," Tessa protested, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth was she had been so focused on saving money and finishing the fence that she had been skipping meals and working through the hottest parts of the day. Isaac gave her a look that said he did not believe her for a second. "When did you last have a proper meal?" he asked. Tessa could not remember. "A few days ago," she said vaguely. Isaac shook his head. "That settles it," he said. "You are coming back to the Double R with me for supper tonight. Cookie makes enough food to feed an army, and Mr. Reynolds would want to meet you anyway." "I cannot just show up at your ranch uninvited," Tessa said, though the thought of a hot meal made her mouth water. "You are invited," Isaac said. "I am inviting you right now, and you are in no condition to argue." Tessa wanted to protest further, but she knew he was right. She was exhausted and light-headed, and the thought of going back to her cabin and cooking beans over the fire was almost unbearable. "All right," she said, "but just for tonight." Isaac helped her to her feet and insisted she ride his horse while he walked beside her, leading the animal by the reins. It was a long walk to the Double R, nearly 5 miles, but Isaac did not complain. He kept up a steady stream of conversation to keep Tessa alert, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the ranch and the men who worked there. The Double R was larger than Tessa had expected, with a sprawling ranch house, a big barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse for the hands. Mr. Reynolds was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a white mustache and a booming laugh. He greeted Tessa with genuine warmth, shaking her hand and welcoming her to the ranch, as if she were an honored guest rather than a bedraggled neighbor who had nearly passed out from heat exhaustion. Cookie, the ranch cook, was a grizzled old man with a missing tooth and a talent for making biscuits that melted in your mouth. He served up plates of beef stew, fresh biscuits, and canned peaches, and Tessa ate until she thought she might burst. The ranch hands were polite and kept their distance, but she could feel their curious glances. A woman alone at the table was a rarity, and she knew they were wondering about her connection to Isaac. After supper, Mr. Reynolds invited Tessa to sit on the porch with him and Isaac while they watched the sun set over the hills. "Isaac tells me you have been working hard on that piece of land," Mr. Reynolds said, lighting a pipe and settling into a rocking chair. "Good land if you can make it work." "I intend to," Tessa said. "The fence is nearly finished, and I am hoping to bring in some cattle next spring." "You will need help with that," Mr. Reynolds said. "Cattle are not easy to manage on your own, especially if you are new to ranching." "I know," Tessa said, "but I will figure it out." Mr. Reynolds exchanged a glance with Isaac and then nodded. "I have no doubt you will," he said, "but if you need advice or a hand, you come see us. We look after our neighbors here." "Thank you," Tessa said, and she meant it. The kindness of these men, who owed her nothing and had no reason to help her, was almost overwhelming. When the stars began to emerge, Isaac offered to ride Tessa back to her cabin. She tried to insist she could walk, but he would not hear of it. He saddled a second horse from the ranch stable and rode beside her through the darkness, the moon lighting their way. They did not talk much on the ride back, but the silence was comfortable, and Tessa found herself acutely aware of Isaac's presence beside her. When they reached her cabin, Isaac dismounted and helped her down from the horse. His hands lingered on her waist for a moment longer than necessary, and Tessa felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. "Thank you for tonight," she said, looking up at him. In the moonlight, his face was all planes and shadows, and she could not quite read his expression. "I needed that more than I realized." "You are welcome," Isaac said. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Tessa, I want you to know that I do not just come by to help with the fence. I come because I enjoy your company." Tessa's heart beat faster. "I enjoy your company too," she said. Isaac smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and more carefree. "Good," he said. "Then maybe I could take you into town for supper sometime. Properly, I mean, not just showing up while you are working." "I would like that," Tessa said, and she realized she meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. Isaac tipped his hat to her and mounted his horse. "I will see you soon," he said, and he rode off into the night, leaving Tessa standing outside her cabin with a smile on her face and a hope in her heart she had not felt since she was a girl. The next Saturday, Isaac rode into town and called on Tessa at her cabin, dressed in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed. He brought her wildflowers he had picked on the way, a cheerful mix of Indian paintbrush and bluebonnets, and Tessa put them in a jar of water on her table, touched by the simple gesture. They rode into Bandera together, side by side, and Tessa felt the eyes of the townspeople on them as they passed through the streets. She knew what they were thinking, knew the gossip that would start the moment they were out of earshot, but she found she did not care. For the first time since coming to Texas, she felt like she belonged somewhere, and that somewhere was beside Isaac Donovan. They had supper at the hotel restaurant, the nicest place in town, and Isaac insisted on paying despite Tessa's protests. They talked and laughed over plates of roast chicken and potatoes, and Tessa felt a lightness in her chest that she had not experienced in years. Isaac was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions, and he made her feel seen in a way her husband never had. After supper, they walked through town in the cool evening air, and Isaac took her hand as they strolled past the storefronts and the church. His hand was warm and calloused from work, and it fit perfectly with hers. They talked about everything and nothing, their words flowing easily, and when they reached the edge of town, Isaac turned to her with a serious expression. "Tessa," he said, "I know you have had a hard time, and I know you came here to build a life on your own. I respect that, and I do not want to get in the way of your dreams, but I need you to know that I care about you, more than I have cared about anyone in a long time." Tessa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I care about you too," she said. "I did not expect to, and I tried not to, because I was so set on being independent. But you have been kind and patient, and you have never tried to make me into something I am not. That means more to me than you know." Isaac reached up and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. And the fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice, made Tessa fall a little more in love with him. "Yes," she said, and Isaac leaned in and kissed her softly, his lips warm and gentle against hers. It was nothing like the cold, perfunctory kisses of her marriage. This kiss was full of promise and tenderness, and when they pulled apart, Tessa felt like the world had shifted on its axis. They rode back to her cabin hand in hand, and Isaac kissed her again before he left, a long, lingering kiss that left her breathless and giddy. She stood on her porch and watched him ride away, and for the first time since coming to Texas, she let herself imagine a future that included someone else, a future where she was not alone. Over the following months, Isaac courted Tessa properly. He took her to church on Sundays, where they sat together in the back pew and endured the curious stares of the congregation. He brought her into town for socials and dances, where he taught her the steps to reels and waltzes she had never learned in St. Louis. He helped her finish the fence, and then helped her repair the roof of the cabin before the fall rains came. He introduced her to his mother, a sweet-faced woman who lived in a small house in Bandera and who welcomed Tessa with open arms and no judgment. Tessa met the other ranch hands from the Double R, men like Tom and Charlie and Old Joe who treated her with respect and good-natured teasing. She learned to rope and brand, to read the sky for signs of weather, and to handle a horse with confidence. She grew stronger and more capable, and her 40 acres began to look less like abandoned land and more like a working ranch. In October, Mr. Reynolds offered to sell Tessa a dozen head of cattle at a fair price, and she accepted gratefully. Isaac helped her drive the cattle from the Double R to her land, and they spent a long afternoon making sure the animals were settled in their new home. As they sat on the porch steps that evening, watching the cattle graze in the fading light, Isaac turned to Tessa with a serious expression. "I have been saving for my own ranch for 10 years, he said, and I am finally close to having enough, but I have been thinking lately that maybe I do not want to do it alone." Tessa's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" she asked, though she thought she knew. Isaac took her hand in his. "I am saying that I love you, Tessa Sullivan. I love your strength and your stubbornness and your determination to build something that is yours. I love the way you sing when you think nobody is listening, and the way you laugh when I tell you a bad joke. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Tessa felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "I love you too," she said. "I did not think I could love anyone again after my marriage, but you have shown me what real love is. You have been patient and kind, and you have never tried to control me or change me. You have just loved me as I am." Isaac pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Will you let me build a life with you, here on your land or wherever you want to go?" "Yes," Tessa said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and Tessa felt a completeness she had never known before. This was what love was supposed to be, she realized. Not a prison or a duty, but a partnership between equals, built on respect and affection and shared dreams. They were married in November, in a simple ceremony at the church in Bandera. Tessa wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Isaac had bought her in town, pale blue with white lace at the collar. Isaac wore his best suit, and his mother cried happy tears in the front pew. Mr. Reynolds and the ranch hands attended, along with a few of the townspeople who had grown to accept Tessa over the past months. The Reverend spoke about love and commitment and building a life together, and when Isaac kissed his bride, the small congregation applauded. After the wedding, they had a party at the Double R, with Cookie's best food and music from a fiddle player Mr. Reynolds had hired for the occasion. They danced under the stars, and Tessa felt like she was floating. This was her wedding, but on her terms, with a man she truly loved and a community that had accepted her. It was everything her first wedding had not been, and she was grateful for every moment. Isaac moved into the cabin with Tessa, and they spent the winter making plans for their future. They decided to expand the cabin, adding a second room and a proper kitchen. Isaac had saved enough money to buy his own land, but he decided to invest it instead in Tessa's property, expanding the herd and building better infrastructure. They were partners in every sense of the word, making decisions together and working side by side to build something that belonged to both of them. In the spring, they added another 20 head of cattle, and Isaac built a proper barn to shelter the animals during storms. They planted a vegetable garden near the cabin, and Tessa learned to can and preserve food for the winter. They hired a hand to help with the heavier work, a young man named Pete who was eager to learn and respectful of Tessa's authority as co-owner of the ranch. Life was not easy. There were droughts and storms, sick cattle and broken fences, long days and short nights. But through it all, Tessa and Isaac faced every challenge together. They laughed together and worked together and loved each other with a depth and constancy that never wavered. In the summer of 1884, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired and queasy for weeks, and when the doctor in town confirmed her suspicions, she rode home with a mixture of joy and terror. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had never wanted children during her first marriage, but with Isaac everything was different. She wanted to build a family with him, to create a legacy that would outlast them both. Isaac was overjoyed when she told him. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and whooping, and then set her down gently as if she were made of glass. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Tessa, we are going to be parents." "Are you ready for this?" Tessa asked, suddenly worried. "It is going to change everything." "I am ready," Isaac said firmly. He cupped her face in his hands and looked into her eyes. "I am ready for anything as long as I have you." The pregnancy was hard. Tessa was sick for the first few months, and as she grew larger, the work of the ranch became more difficult. Isaac was endlessly patient, taking on more of the physical labor and insisting that Tessa rest whenever she looked tired. His mother came to stay with them in the final weeks, helping with the cooking and cleaning and preparing for the baby's arrival. In March of 1885, Tessa gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, but when the midwife placed the tiny, squalling infant in her arms, Tessa felt a love so fierce and overwhelming that it took her breath away. Isaac sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, staring at their son with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Isaac said, his voice choked with emotion. "Tessa, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James after Isaac's father, and he was the light of their lives. Isaac was a devoted father, waking in the night to help with feedings and rocking James to sleep when he fussed. Tessa marveled at the sight of her strong, capable husband cradling their tiny son with such tenderness. As James grew, the ranch grew too. They added more cattle and horses, built a second barn, and hired another hand to help with the work. Tessa proved to be a shrewd businesswoman, negotiating fair prices for their beef and managing their finances with care. Isaac handled the day-to-day operations, working from dawn to dusk to ensure the animals were healthy and the land was well maintained. In 1887, Tessa gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had Tessa's dark hair and Isaac's gray eyes, and she was as strong-willed as her mother. James adored his little sister, and the two of them filled the cabin with laughter and noise. By 1890, the ranch had grown to over 200 acres. They had bought the adjacent properties as they became available, and their herd had grown to over 100 head. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house, with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor where the family gathered in the evenings. They had a reputation in Bandera as fair employers and good neighbors, and their success had inspired other women in the area to consider ranching on their own. Tessa often thought back to those early days, when she had been alone on 40 abandoned acres, struggling to string wire and plant posts in the hard Texas ground. She thought about the day Isaac had ridden up and offered to help, and how that simple act of kindness had changed the course of her life. She had come to Texas looking for independence, and she had found that, but she had also found something more. She had found partnership and love and a family that filled her heart to bursting. One evening in late summer, Tessa and Isaac sat on the porch of their house, watching their children play in the yard. James was 12 now, tall and lanky, and Rose was 10, all freckles and mischief. The sun was setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was warm and sweet with the scent of grass and cattle. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked, reaching over to take Tessa's hand. "Giving up your independence to marry me?" Tessa looked at him, surprised. "Never," she said firmly. "I did not give up my independence, Isaac. I chose to share it with you. There is a difference." Isaac smiled and brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I am glad," he said, "because I cannot imagine my life without you." "Nor I without you," Tessa said. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and watched their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. This was her life, she thought. This ranch, this family, this man beside her. It was everything she had never known she wanted, and everything she would never take for granted. In 1892, they celebrated 10 years since the day Isaac had first ridden onto Tessa's land and helped her with that stubborn fence post. They threw a party at the ranch, inviting Mr. Reynolds and the Hands from the Double R, Isaac's mother, and all the friends and neighbors they had made over the years. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and as Tessa whirled around the dance floor in Isaac's arms, she felt a profound gratitude for the life they had built together. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked, pulling her close as the music slowed. "I am thinking about that first day," Tessa said, "when you stopped to help me with the fence. I was so determined to do everything on my own and so suspicious of your motives. If I had known then what I know now, I would have welcomed you with open arms." "Maybe," Isaac said with a grin, "but I like that you made me work for it. You never did make things easy, Tessa Sullivan." "Tessa Donovan," she corrected, and Isaac laughed. "Tessa Donovan," he agreed. "My wife, my partner, and the love of my life." They kissed, long and sweet, and the gathered guests cheered and applauded. Tessa pulled back and looked around at the faces of the people who had become her community, her family. She saw James and Rose dancing together, Pete and the other ranch hands laughing by the food table, Isaac's mother wiping happy tears from her eyes. This was what she had built, not just a ranch, but a home full of love and laughter and belonging. Over the next few years, the ranch continued to thrive. James grew into a capable young man, eager to learn the family business and take on more responsibility. Rose proved to be a talented rider and roper, with a natural affinity for horses that reminded Tessa of Isaac. They talked about adding more children, but Tessa was content with the 2 they had. James and Rose were more than enough to fill their lives with joy and chaos. In 1895, Mr. Reynolds passed away, leaving the Double R to his son, who had been working the ranch for years. Isaac was offered a position as foreman, but he turned it down, preferring to focus on his own land and his own family. The new owner of the Double R respected that decision, and the 2 ranches continued to work together as neighbors and friends. Tessa's mother wrote to her in 1896, a tentative letter that arrived out of the blue after years of silence. She spoke of regret for the way they had parted, of missing her youngest daughter, and of wanting to know her grandchildren. Tessa cried when she read the letter, all the old hurts and angers rising to the surface, but Isaac held her and encouraged her to respond with grace. Tessa wrote back, cautiously at first, but over time the letters became more frequent and more honest. Her mother never visited Texas. She was too old and frail for the journey, but they maintained a correspondence that brought Tessa a measure of peace. She sent photographs of James and Rose, and her mother wrote back with stories of Tessa's sisters and their families. It was not a perfect reconciliation, but it was enough. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Tessa and Isaac stood on the porch of their house and looked out over the land they had built together. The ranch stretched as far as the eye could see, a testament to years of hard work and determination. James was 18 now, a man grown, and Rose was 16, on the cusp of womanhood. Both of them had inherited their parents' work ethic and love of the land, and Tessa knew the ranch would be in good hands when the time came to pass it on. "We have done well," Isaac said, his arm around Tessa's waist. "Better than I ever dreamed when I was saving pennies and hoping for a place of my own." "We have done very well," Tessa agreed, "and we have done it together." Isaac turned to her, his gray eyes serious. "I meant what I said on our wedding day," he said. "I love you more now than I did then, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Tessa Donovan." Tessa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," she said. "You showed me what love could be, what partnership could be. You gave me a life I never thought I could have." They kissed, the same as they had 1,000 times before, but it never lost its sweetness. As the sun set over the Texas hills, Tessa thought about the girl she had been when she first arrived in Bandera, alone and determined to prove she could survive on her own. She had proven that, yes, but she had also learned something more important. She had learned that strength did not mean doing everything alone, that asking for help was not a weakness, and that love, real love, was the greatest gift of all. James and Rose came out onto the porch, arguing good-naturedly about something, and Tessa and Isaac broke apart to listen to their children's debate. It was something about cattle breeding, a topic that could spark hours of discussion in their family. Tessa smiled and shook her head, amused by the passion in their voices. "Come on," she said to Isaac, taking his hand. "Let us go settle this before they wake the whole county." Isaac laughed and followed her inside, and the four of them sat around the kitchen table, talking and laughing until the stars filled the sky. This was family, Tessa thought. This was home, and it was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever hoped for. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Isaac's mother passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1903, and they buried her in the Bandera cemetery with a headstone that read, "Beloved Mother and Grandmother." James married a sweet-natured girl from town in 1904, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property. Rose followed her heart to California in 1906, chasing a dream of studying veterinary medicine at a new college that accepted women. Tessa was proud of her daughter's courage and ambition, even as she missed her terribly. In 1908, James and his wife had their first child, a boy they named Isaac after his grandfather. Tessa held her grandson in her arms and felt the circle of life turning, the legacy she and Isaac had built continuing into the next generation. Isaac Sr. was a doting grandfather, teaching young Isaac to ride and rope as soon as the boy was old enough to sit on a horse. Rose returned from California in 1910 with a degree in veterinary medicine and a determination to open a practice in Bandera. She became the first female veterinarian in the county, and her skill and knowledge earned her the respect of even the most skeptical ranchers. Tessa watched her daughter thrive and felt a fierce pride that her own struggles had helped pave the way for Rose's success. In 1912, Tessa and Isaac celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them. The ranch was running smoothly under James's management, and they had earned the right to slow down and enjoy their golden years. They talked about the past and the future, about the dreams they had achieved and the ones that had changed along the way. "Do you remember that day I helped you with the fence post?" Isaac asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "You looked at me like I was the worst kind of nuisance." "I did not," Tessa protested, but she was laughing. "Well, maybe a little. I was so determined to do everything on my own." "And you did," Isaac said. "You proved you could manage that land alone, but I am glad you decided to let me help anyway." "So am I," Tessa said softly. She reached across the table and took his hand, marveling at how familiar it felt after all these years. His hands were more weathered now, the knuckles a little swollen with age, but they were still strong and capable. "I could not have asked for a better partner, Isaac, in work or in life." "The feeling is mutual," Isaac said, and he raised his glass in a toast. "To 30 years and to 30 more." "To 30 more," Tessa echoed, and they clinked their glasses together and drank. As it turned out, they did not have 30 more years, but they had enough. Isaac passed away in 1920 at the age of 63 after a brief illness that came on suddenly and took him quickly. Tessa was devastated by the loss, but she found comfort in the knowledge that they had lived a full and happy life together, that they had built something lasting, and that their love had been real and true until the very end. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and she remained active in the community until her health began to fail. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1925, at the age of 65, in the house she and Isaac had built together. She was buried beside him in the Bandera Cemetery, under a headstone that read "Beloved Wife, Mother, and Pioneer." James took over the ranch and ran it successfully for many years, passing it on to his own children when the time came. Rose continued her veterinary practice and became a mentor to other women who wanted to enter the profession. The ranch remained in the Donovan family for generations, a testament to the hard work and determination of the woman who had started it all, stringing wire on 40 abandoned acres and refusing to give up on her dream. And in the town of Bandera, people still told the story of Tessa Sullivan Donovan, the woman who had come from St. Louis with nothing but courage and a fierce independence, and who had built a life and a legacy that endured long after she was gone. They told the story of how she had struggled with that tall fence post, and how a cowboy named Isaac Donovan had stopped to help her, and how that simple act of kindness had grown into a love story that spanned decades and inspired generations. It was a story of hard work and perseverance, of love and partnership, and of the wild beauty of the Texas frontier. It was a story that reminded people that sometimes the best things in life come when you are willing to accept help, to open your heart, and to take a chance on something new. And it was a story that proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that real love could conquer any obstacle and endure any hardship, as long as two people were willing to work together and never give up on each other or their dreams. The legacy of Tessa and Isaac lived on in the land they had worked, in the family they had raised, and in the memories of everyone who had known them. Their story became part of the fabric of Bandera, a reminder of the courage and determination it took to build a life in the Wild West, and of the power of love to transform even the hardest of circumstances into something beautiful and lasting. And so the story ended, not with sadness, but with hope. Hope that the land would continue to flourish, that the family would continue to grow, and that the love Tessa and Isaac had shared would continue to inspire others for generations to come. It was a fitting end to a life well lived, and a love well earned. The wire they had strung together, post by post, had held firm against time and weather, just like the bond they had forged, and both would endure as long as the Texas sun rose over the hills and the wind whispered through the grass. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would walk the same land, tend the same cattle, and remember the story of how it all began, with a woman stringing wire on 40 abandoned acres and a cowboy who stopped to help her with a post she could not reach. And in that remembering, Tessa and Isaac would live on forever, their love story as enduring as the land itself.